Hi, welcome to Cooking with Diane. I'm Diane, and today we're going to talk about how to make stock. A lot of you might be starting to think about making your own stocks instead of buying them in the store, and that's a really great choice. Making your own stock is very versatile, it saves you a lot of money, and it means that you can control the flavor of your stock, whereas when you're buying one in the store, you don't actually really know what's in there. By knowing exactly what you've put in your stock, you're able to control what the flavor is like and what the quality is like. The thing that is the most important about stock to me, and this is important, is that you don't need a recipe. So if you think you need to find a recipe that tells you exactly how much of what vegetable to put in your stock, you're doing it wrong. Sorry. Stock should be made out of what you have. You should never have to buy anything to make stock. I like to start by inventorying what I have, so I know what vegetables are going to go bad. I should use them up and put them in my stock. I also want to make sure I get the right balance of flavors in my stock. So I'm going to start by looking at all the vegetables I have and deciding what's going to go in and what I want to keep for some other use. The three vegetables that are the most important are onion, carrot, and celery. So I always start with those three. So I have some yellow onions here. They're pretty small, so I think I'm going to use 2 of them. How much or little you use of any one vegetable is totally up to you, and it also depends on how much stock you want to make. I have a bunch of carrots, so I'm going to pick out the kind of limp looking ones that I probably wouldn't want to use for cooking. And they're also kind of small, so I'm going to just take about 3 carrots worth of carrots. Some of these are little nubby nubs that I want to use up. Then I have some celery. I'm going to take off the limp looking pieces and use those in my stock so I can use the nicer, straighter, fresher looking pieces for food. This is also an opportunity to just take off the end of my celery because I know I'm not going to be using that in cooking, but it works pretty well in stock. So that's going to go in. Leek is related to an onion. So if you don't have onions, you can use anything in the onion family. Leeks, scallions, shallots, even just a bunch of garlic will help you out. And even if you do have onions, you can still use other alliums or things in the onion family to add flavor to your stock. So similar to taking off the bottom of the celery, I'm going to just take off the dark green parts of the leek because I know I'm not going to use that for cooking. I want to save the white bottom of the leek for cooking. So I'm saving this for later, and I'm putting these in my stock. The green tops of leeks are kind of fibrous and not so great to eat, but they have a lot of flavor still, and so you can use them for stock. The one thing you do want to remember to do with leeks is to wash them because they're full of dirt. You want to wash all the vegetables you're going to put in your stock, but leeks especially. While I'm thinking about oniony things, I can take off a few of these limp scallions and throw them in, but for the most part I want to keep these scallions to use for cooking. So I'm just going to take the ratty looking bits. Next, I have these shiitake stems that I saved when I was chopping mushrooms the other day. So those are definitely going to go in my stock. Anything in the mushroom family is going to add amazing savory flavor to your stock. I have this lemongrass. It's pretty aromatic, but it's going to give my stock a very distinct flavor. So I'm going to leave this out because I want my stock to be more all-purpose. I have some sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes are great to add to stock, especially if you don't have carrots because they add that kind of sweetness to it. But I want to save these to actually eat, so they're not going in my stock. I have a red pepper. I don't have any plans for it, and it's getting kind of wrinkly on the outside. So I'm going to say this can go in my stock. It's going to add color. Peppers don't add amazing flavor to stock, but if you need to use one up, go ahead and put it in. Maybe not your hot peppers though. I have some radishes. Those could go in if I wanted, but I'm going to save them for a salad. Potatoes too. They can go in stock. They're not going to hurt it, but they don't really add that much flavor and they make it cloudy, so I'm going to keep these to eat. I have some garlic. That's definitely going in. I'm just going to pop off maybe 4 or 5 cloves. If you have any sad old herbs languishing in your refrigerator, as long as they're not moldy, those can definitely go in stock. So I have a couple sprigs of thyme. Those are going in. So last I have some lettuce from my salad drawer to take a look at. I have some radicchio. Radicchio is kind of bitter and will also turn my stock purple, so I'm not going to put that in. And I have some escarole. If this escarole was looking a little bit limper and sadder, I could definitely put it in my stock, but it's still looking kind of nice and fresh, so I'm going to save it for a salad. And last I have some cabbage. I definitely know people that put cabbage in stock and have no problem with it. I find that putting anything in the cabbage family, which includes broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, what else? Kale, can make your stock kind of stinky. So I'm going to leave this one out. Cabbage also lasts for a really long time, so I'm not worried about using it up before it goes bad. So now I have the vegetables that I'm going to put in my stock. I'm going to get rid of these other vegetables and put them back away in the fridge. So at this point you might be wondering, do I have to use whole vegetables in my stock? Can't I just use the scraps that I usually throw out when I'm cooking? The answer is, yes you can, but it takes some advanced planning. Every time you're cooking, if you peel an onion, save that peel. If you're peeling carrots or chopping off the tops of carrots, save those. If you're getting rid of a pepper stem, save that. All of these things can be saved in a gallon-sized container or bag in your freezer. Once that bag or container is full, it's time to make stock. But if you just wake up one day and you think, oh, I need some vegetable stock for that soup I'm making tonight, then you're going to need to use actual vegetables that you have around. So this is the reason that I really inventory through my whole refrigerator to make sure that I'm using up the things that need to get used up and that I have as much robust variety in my stock that I can. So with these, we're not going to be peeling them or anything. We're just going to be roughly chopping them and throwing them in the stock. So it's important that I give them a good wash to get any dirt off. So now all of my vegetables are washed and ready to go. I'm just going to give them a rough chop. I'm not going to need to take off any peels, but if there's anything on the vegetable that might be really dirty, like the bottom of the carrot or the bottom of the celery, I'll trim that part off. I'll also take out the seeds of the pepper, which can be kind of bitter. So make sure that you're safe, that you're always chopping with your bear claw, that you're putting the flat side down on your board so your things aren't rolling around. But otherwise, there's no need to go for any perfect, beautiful dice here. You're just giving it a rough chop. And the garlic, I'll keep the cloves whole, but I'm going to give them a smash. So you can keep the garlic skin on, but you want to smash it so that its flavor can come out. Okay, so now my vegetables are chopped and ready to go in. At this point, I could just go ahead and dump them into a pot, fill it with water, and start making my stock. But I'm going to do a couple extra optional things to give my stock extra robust flavor. A stock made with raw vegetables that were just simmered raw is going to taste a little bit lighter and plainer than a stock made with roasted vegetables. So if I have time and if I really want that kind of robust, rich stock flavor, I'll take the time to roast my vegetables a little bit. You don't need to roast them all the way. We don't need to cook them. What I want is to develop a little bit of brownness, a little bit of caramelization on the outside that's going to give flavor to my stock. So without worrying too much about how much room is on my pan or anything like that, I'm just going to spread them out on a sheet tray, drizzle them with a little bit of oil. Not because I want my stock to be oily, but because the oil helps the vegetables brown in the oven. Sprinkle them with a little bit of salt. And just give them a toss right on the tray. I'm going to put these in a 500-degree oven for probably about 10 to 15 minutes, or until I start seeing a little bit of brownness on the outside. Yes, you heard me right, 500 degrees. I want it really hot to char them on the outside. Again, we're not looking to cook the vegetable completely, we're just looking to get it a little bit brown. While my vegetables are cooking, let's talk about some other things you can add to your stock that aren't vegetables. If you have any whole grains or beans hanging around your pantry, and I bet you have some dried beans that you're not using, they can go in your stock. You don't want a lot of them, but both grains and beans add a lot to the water that they're cooked in. So if you happen to have one that's been kicking around your pantry for a while, you don't think you're going to use it, go ahead and throw it in your stock. I have a little bit of farro that has been in my pantry for at least a year. So I'm going to put some of this in, probably just like a quarter cup. I also have some yellow split peas. They have a pretty distinct flavor, so I'm only going to want to use maybe a couple spoonfuls of them, but they're still going to add a more savory, robust flavor to my stock. This might be something that not everybody has around, but if you have some seaweed kicking around, maybe from that time you tried to make sushi and then it didn't work out and you never thought about it again, throw some seaweed in. Toasted nuts can also be a good addition to a stock. If I took these walnuts, toasted them in the oven for 10 minutes, and then added them to my stock, again, they add kind of a nice toasty, nutty flavor to my stock. Obviously, if you're adding any sort of allergen to your stock, you should make a note of it so that all those people coming over to your house with allergies don't have a reaction. One secret weapon that I love for stock and sauces is Parmesan rinds. So if you're not already buying your Parmesan in blocks instead of pre-shredded, first you should start doing this because it's going to give you more quality for your money, and it's going to last longer than the pre-shredded kind. Now when you buy the Parmesan blocks, there's this skin on the outside. It's not wax, it's just really, really, really old, dried out Parmesan that we can't eat, but is still totally edible. So cut that off when you're grating it, but keep it. You can keep Parmesan rinds in the freezer just about forever. And then you can add them to stocks or directly to marinara sauce or bechamel sauce or risotto or soups, anything that needs that extra savory, cheesy flavor. Finally, anything tomato is going to add great savory flavor to your stock. So if you have fresh tomatoes, throw them in. If you have canned tomatoes, maybe just a little bit of that because it's pretty concentrated, or just a squirt of tomato paste if you want a richer stock. A lot of people think you need a giant pot in order to make stock. That's only true if you want to make a giant amount of stock. Most of us only have room in our freezers for a smaller amount of stock. So I usually make a gallon or so at a time. This is a 2-gallon pot. So once it's filled with vegetables, it'll probably hold about 1 gallon of water. So I'm going to put in some of my farro. Again, not a ton, just a handful. I'm going to put in these split peas. Any sort of bean will work for this. I'm going to put in a little bit of the seaweed. I'm going to put in my parm rinds. A squirt of tomato paste, why not? Might as well use it up. Notice that I'm just using a little bit of each type of thing in my stock. If I use a lot of any one thing, my stock is just going to taste like that thing. And I'm not making seaweed stock, I'm not making bean stock, I'm making all-purpose vegetable stock. So I want it to have a lot of different flavors from a lot of different things. So my vegetables have come out of the oven. They were in a 500-degree oven for about 15 minutes, and ovens vary in how hot they are, so yours might get more brown in that amount of time or less brown. I could definitely go further with how much I cook these, but this will definitely give my stock more flavor. So go ahead and put all of your cooked vegetables and any juices that are on the pan in your pot. If you're a crazy person, you can use your hands for this, or you can use a spoon because the vegetables are hot. So now my pot is a little less than half full with all the stuff that I want to make stock out of. So how much water I add at this point is up to me. If I want a more concentrated stock, then I should just cover the vegetables with water and not a lot more. If I want more stock and I'm willing to have a less concentrated stock, then I'm going to fill the whole thing to the top with water. The ratio of water to vegetables is up to you. It's just going to make a more or less concentrated stock. It's also important that you use cold water for this. I know you might think that you're going to heat it up anyway, so you might as well start with hot water. But hot water generally leaches iron and other things from the pipes in your building. So it's not really desirable for cooking, both from a health standpoint and from a flavor standpoint. So I always start with cold water. Okay, so now my pot is pretty full with water. I filled it to about 2 inches from the top. I'm going to put it on the stove on high heat just to bring it to a boil. Once it comes to a boil, we're going to lower it to a simmer. I don't cover my stock. A lot of people think, if you have something on the stove, you have to cover it. But what we actually want the natural evaporation that will happen if you don't keep your pot covered. If your stock is evaporating too much and bubbling away into nothing, obviously you can add more water and cover it if you want to. But the flavor will concentrate better if you allow some of that evaporation to happen by leaving the lid off. Now, my vegetable stock has come to a boil. My automatic fan has turned on because of all the steamy stuff cooking on my stove. So come over here and let's check it out. So you can see that my stock is rapidly boiling. That means there's big bubbles all around the pot. There's bubbles everywhere. They're really large. They're coming at you really fast. This is what you want to start the stock, but you don't want to keep it at a boil because that'll just disintegrate the vegetables. So at this point, I'm going to turn the heat down to low and bring it down to a simmer. So a simmer means that the bubbles should still be coming. It should still be bubbling, but they should be a lot smaller and not as rapid. So this is the kind of simmer I'm looking for. You can see there's little bubbles happening in the back of the pot, but it's not bubbling everywhere, and the bubbles are little. They're not super big. You do want to make sure that your pot stays at a simmer though. If it stops bubbling at all, then it's not going to be cooking correctly. And if it starts bubbling too rapidly, then the vegetables are going to disintegrate. So you want it to stay at a simmer like this. Little bubbles, not too many of them. Your pot's not going to stay at the same temperature the whole time it's cooking. It's going to fluctuate in heat. So it's important to keep checking your pot, making sure it's simmering. If it's doing nothing, turn the heat up. If it's boiling, turn the heat down. So once your stock is simmering nicely, let it simmer for about 1 hour. Vegetable stock doesn't need to cook for longer than an hour. So now my vegetable stock has simmered for an hour. It looks good. The color is deeper, the vegetables look cooked down. I'm ready to take it off the heat. So what I do to strain out my stock is I take a wire strainer. It will strain your stock more effectively if it has those like really thin mesh holes. If all you have is a pasta colander with really big holes, you can use that, but you're going to get more stuff in your stock. So I put my strainer over a bowl that's large enough to hold all the liquid in my pot. And I prefer to use a heat-proof bowl, so ceramic or heat-proof glass is going to be a better choice than plastic. And I'm going to carefully pour my stock into the bowl. You see it might splash a little, so make sure you're pouring away from yourself so you don't splash yourself with hot stock. If you're worried about overflowing or splashing, you could also do this whole process in the sink. And ideally, your vegetables get caught in the strainer and all of the liquid goes into the bowl. If most of the liquid has come out of your pot and there's still vegetables in there, that's fine. You can just leave them in the pot. And I'm going to take the rest of the vegetables out of the strainer and put them in the pot, back in the pot too. You don't really want to press down on the vegetables to try to squeeze out every last drop, because that'll get sediment and cloudy stuff in your stock. All of the good stuff, all the flavor, all the vitamins and minerals, that's already in the water. So now I have beautiful vegetable stock in this bowl, and I have soggy cooked vegetables in this pot. Both of them are hot. So before I put these vegetables in the compost or the trash, I'm going to let them cool down. There's really no reason to keep these vegetables at this point because, again, all of their flavor, all of their vitamins have gone into the water. These are just fiber at this point. The stock is still super hot, and I'm going to be packing it into plastic containers to freeze, so I want it to cool down before I do that. You can let this stock cool for about an hour at room temperature and it won't go bad. My stock has now been cooling for about an hour. Amazing how that works, huh? So my stock isn't totally cool. It's not room temperature yet, but it's not boiling hot anymore either. The reason I don't want to use boiling hot stock is, number one, I'm using plastic containers to store it, and I don't want it to melt the plastic, but also I'm putting it in my freezer. And if I put a gallon of boiling hot stock in my freezer, that's going to melt everything else in my freezer, and I don't want to eat melted ice cream later today. So it's good to cool down your stock a little bit. If you're really trying to cool down your stock fast, spread it out into a couple different bowls or into one large flat container like a cake pan. More surface area means it will cool down faster. So now I'm ready to pack up and store my stock. I usually keep my stock in the freezer in these quart and pint containers. These hold 4 cups, these hold 2 cups. That's about the amount of stock that I'll use at a time, so these containers work for me. If you're used to using stock in smaller quantities, some people like to freeze it in ice cube containers. Then when the ice cubes of stock have frozen, you can pop them out and put them all in a Ziploc bag. If you think you're going to be using your stock within a week, you can keep it in the refrigerator. You don't have to freeze it. So now I want to do 2 things before I put my stock away. Number 1 is taste the stock. I want to know what it tastes like so that I'm informed when I use it as an ingredient in my soup in the future or in my risotto. Tasting stock might be feel a little bit weird because it hasn't been seasoned to taste. We didn't really add any salt to this except for what we sprinkled on the vegetables before we roasted them. So it might taste a little bit plain, but you should be able to taste the balance of flavors. Is it really sweet because you added a lot of carrots and sweet potatoes? Is it a little bit bitter because you put in some bitter greens? Does it have that funkiness from putting cabbage in it? Or is it like really savory because of those Parmesan rinds we put in it? These are good things to think about and know for when you use it in the future, because not all stocks taste exactly the same. Mine tastes mostly like vegetables, with a little bit of savoriness from the tomato and the Parmesan and the mushrooms. But mostly it's a pretty basic tasting stock. There's a nice balance of sweet and vegetable-y flavors. Next, I'm going to cover all of my containers and label them. We know what they are now, but future Diane is not going to remember that this is vegetable stock, or that there's farro in it, which is not gluten-free, or that there's Parmesan in it. So labeling it especially if you're going to keep it in the freezer for a couple months, will help your future self remember that there's stock in the freezer and what kind of stock it is. You'll also notice that I didn't fill the containers all the way up. I left an inch between the top of the liquid and the top of the container because water expands when you freeze it. So if I don't want these containers to explode when the contents of them freeze, then I need to leave a gap for the stock to expand into. It's helpful to use masking tape or painter's tape. Make sure it's the type that's going to come off your containers cleanly later, because what you don't want to do is use like a mailing label, which is going to stick to your container forever. Some adhesives don't come off as easily as others. Yay! So my stock is all packed and labeled and ready to go in my freezer. I make sure that the label is facing out wherever I put it in my freezer. When you're ready to use your stock, to defrost it, just run the whole thing under water, which will loosen it away from the sides of the container. Plop it into a saucepan. It's going to be one big cylindrical, icy cube of stock. And then put it on medium heat. It should thaw into liquid in 5 to 10 minutes. So I usually take out my stock and start thawing it while I'm gathering ingredients for whatever I'm making. So that's how to make stock. I have some dishes to clean up. You have some stock to make. Thank you so much for coming, and have a great day.